Hi everyone, it's Eileen from Plus Size to Plant Based. So today I wanted to talk a little bit more of a personal issue, but I felt like if I put it out there, maybe it will help someone who has had early loss, miscarriage, or premature births or stillborns or I found that when I would listen to people on YouTube, sometimes it would make you feel like you're not alone. And I first want to say that I did lose my sons 12 years ago this month. And though it's been that long, it's amazing how when you reflect, when you're this far removed, there's just so many insights that you get. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about my journey. And then I wanted to talk about where I am today and the hope that I have for trying to conceive now. But basically, back in, 2004, I had a brief marriage and I was quickly divorced. We were young and it just wasn't working out. And I was a single professional and I really wanted children, but I knew, well, it wasn't going to be traditional because my marriage had broken up by age 24. And at that time, I thought, well, I'm never going to get married again. And so I just pursued like looking into how do you do this as a single woman. And at that time, there were books out like Single Mother by Choice and things like that. So there were really things back in 2004 that were encouraging. And, from my family, they were just like, what are you doing? This is not traditional and everything. But I knew I had such hormonal problems because at that time, I was diagnosed with PCOS. I didn't know about the adrenal issues that I now know I have. And for those of you that don't know about that, it's called NCAH, and it's a common misdiagnosis for PCOS. So that's something to look up if that sounds like you. But at the time, I only knew I had PCOS, and I knew it would be hard work. So I found a really great infertility specialist here in New Jersey. And they were very non-judgmental. They didn't say, why are you doing this at a young age? They actually said, oh, it's wonderful that you're here early because, we see people in their 40s and everything. Of course, now I'm 40. But at that time, I did everything I could to just almost be a student of infertility. And I would find myself there every day. They called it doing the blood run where you have to go and, test the levels and everything was getting checked. And this went on and on and on for years. And finally, so this was early 2004, finally in beginning of 2005, I went through IUI cycles, and that's where they just inject. For me, it was donor sperm that I picked out, and they injected that, and I was just going by myself doing this, and they did these 6 cycles where they time it, and so that's the least invasive way to try, and this was going to be my last attempt, the 6th try, and then from there, you have to look into IVF and things like that nature. So on the 6th attempt, I just got the daily check-in from the nurse. And this one particular day, I remember it was so casual. She's like, I think she was on speakerphone because she kind of was delayed. She's like, everything's positive. And I'm like, positive? And she's like, yeah, you're pregnant. And I can't even tell you. I just had I was single, so I had all these visions for, I guess, pouring your love into another creature. And I think that's what I know this sounds terrible, creature, a little baby, but I know a lot of people, they have reasons for wanting to have a child. And I think a lot of them are like me, like wanting something so much to just give your attention. And so I was I had so many plans. I was so excited. And by 9 weeks, I had the ultrasound And it was the first one to hear the heartbeat and everything. And so I go in there, and the woman just is looking at the screen, not saying anything. And she just says, "Oh, I just want to talk to the doctor a minute." And I'm just like, all right, I guess I kind of had a feeling something wasn't right because she wasn't talking. But I just, I was kind of clueless at the time. And the doctor comes in, and she's like, "Oh yeah, that looks like a collapsed," I think she said yolk or something. And I remember I'm just hearing these words, collapsed something, and I was so traumatized because I'm so excited to hear the heartbeat for the first time. And she says, "Oh yeah, it just looks like this is basically a miscarriage." And it was so nonchalant, and it was so devastating. I don't think I mean, I really did not like that woman after that, obviously. But I think for them, for the doctors that do reproductive endocrinology, it just becomes another day, another, I don't know, another ultrasound that's not quite right. But I think they have to be just careful and knowing that they're still dealing with people. And I was so young, and I was so crushed. I was so crushed. And then I had to have a surgery to remove everything, a DNC or D&E. I forget which one. I think it was the E. And they, removed everything. And I just felt so empty and sad. And I was just so traumatized. And I knew I didn't want to give up. I'm like the personality that wants to keep going. But I think some time had passed, and excuse me, I actually had started dating someone. And I remember saying, I'd like to start a family. And I think for them, they were like, oh, maybe eventually someday. But for me, I was still there. I wanted to pursue it. And I remember I ended the relationship, not just for that reason, but that I just felt that I needed to pursue this aspect of my life. I just was driven. And so I was then single again for several months. And I made the decision, I'm going to go back. I'm going to spend the money. I'm going to get the IVF surgery, where they remove it's not really quite surgery, but it's invasive. They put you to sleep. They have to, harvest the eggs, and it's a pretty, anybody going through IVF obviously knows how intense that is, but I'm like, I'm going to do it. And so I'm going once again. And I kind of got that nerve up again. And, yeah, they actually harvested, I think it was 5 eggs, and, maybe it was more. Maybe it was 7, because I think they put 2 back in for that cycle. It was it's called a fresh cycle, and they put the 2 embryos back in, and I waited and everything, and I was so excited. And then I got a call that it just did not work. And all the time, the effort, the money, the injections you have to take to go through this process, it's too much. It's like you want so bad that baby, and you want it to work. And so I had these frozen embryos left, and I remember talking to the doctor, and at the time, I mean, now looking back, I think this was probably not the best thing to do, but I remember talking to the doctor, and we were talking about, on this attempt, do we just put in all that we have and see if something takes? And they did that all the time. But now I realize how, my gosh, that could have been really bad. And I mean, I didn't really know, and I was just blindly trusting. And so they did that for another attempt, and this was the last of everything. And the money spent, it's very, very expensive to do that. And as a single girl, and then I get a call that there was a positive pregnancy. And I go right in for an ultrasound, and they said 1 took. I mean, you think about how amazing that is. And the whole time I'm thinking it was more than one baby. And they were like, nope, we just see one in there, And I'm like, okay. And by the time I went back, I think this was to the heartbeat ultrasound, because when they do IVF, it's so early, and it's even before, the heartbeat appears. And so they, I just wanted to hear the heartbeat. And there was like, yeah, there's a heartbeat and there's another heartbeat. And I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, this is one embryo, but it's identical twins. And I said, did that happen because of the IVF? And the doctor came in and it's like, oh no, that's you. That's all you. And I'm like, what? So interestingly enough, identical twins, they don't know precisely how an embryo splits and that happens. They just said that no, usually with IVF, it's fraternal twins. So I just was so excited, and the doctor was looking at me like concerned. And now, obviously, in hindsight, I get that identical twin pregnancies are difficult. You don't see that many identical twins. I mean, there are sets around, of course, but it's not a common thing. And then I think even to get pregnant with identical twins is like 1 in like 275 or something like that. So, I did recognize that look of concern, but I was elated. And at this point, we are now into 2006. So, over 2 years had gone by since the start of this journey. And I felt like I had a college education in all of this. And so I was just living my life and just, I can't even describe it. I was just so excited. And ironically, and maybe by the grace of God, well, of course, by the grace of God, I met my current husband during that time. I was pregnant. And when I met him, I actually told him, I said, oh, it's nice to meet you. And he was interested in me. And I just said, I'm sorry, I'm pregnant. And he said, oh, so you're seeing someone? I said, oh, no. And then I told him the story, and he was completely supportive. So, my now husband, and he was actually super supportive, and he took on the role that like, we're together, so I'm going to care for your children. And then we soon found out it was boys, and he was excited. And yeah, it was just such a happy time until I went to my 16-week checkup. And the doctor says, well, they have twin-to-twin transfusion. And I'm just like, oh, okay. And they said one's smaller than the other. I said, oh, okay. But they're, I saw them on the screen and they're moving. And he said, yeah, he said, probably the latest you'll go to term is like 28 weeks. And so it's risky. So I was really, really in a state of shock, because I'd been through so much, and now this twin-to-twin transfusion and everything. And another thing is the progesterone for people with, at the time, PCOS. They noticed there was what am I trying to say? There was a link that women that had this had very low progesterone. So I was always taking note of my progesterone and taking all types of medications and things like that. So I was doing everything I could to support this pregnancy. And I just was like, all right, whatever it's going to be. And prior to this 16-week ultrasound and everything, I do want to mention something very strange. I had a dream, and I'm walking down these hallways, and they were lit up very sterile, like very fluorescent, almost like like a spaceship or something. I don't know. And I'm running. I'm walking, then I'm running. And I had a baby that fell out. And I kept saying, put him back in, put him back in. And I remember at the time, I knew I was 13 weeks along. And so it was a very frightening dream. But now I was 16 weeks. So I was like, okay, it was just a terrible, terrible dream. And about a week after this appointment, I'm knowing the deal now. I'm fully expecting a premature birth. But my water broke when I threw up. And I was throwing up a lot in the mornings, obviously. And I kept saying to the doctor, is that too much strain? They're like, no, 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 it's fine. Well, this one morning, of course, I throw up and my water breaks. And I just cried. I just burst out in tears. And now there's a garbage truck or something out there. Sorry. So anyway, I was devastated. My mom, I called her. We were actually headed to an appointment, an ultrasound again that week. It was like the next week. And here I find myself in the hospital. And they're basically like, you're going to be in here until you deliver. And I think the 2 days after I went into the hospital, I get up in the morning. Now, I was allowed to get up to go to the bathroom, but I had to stay on bed rest. And I get up and I actually feel feet when I went to wipe. And my first son, Aaron, his feet were dangling and he was coming out. And he was the one that the water broke. So they, in identical twins, they have a very thin barrier. And so they have their own sacs within one, it's like picture like one balloon divided in two, but there's like a thin membrane. And his side was the water that broke. And the other baby, which was Ian, they actually tied off the cord after I delivered Aaron to try to save Ian. And I'm just in such a state of shock at this point. And when Aaron came out, he was like a pound and so small, and his heart was beating and so strong. I mean, he had, he was perfect. He had 10 fingers, 10 toes, and he just was born too soon. And they said, the other, usually with twins, the other one's right behind. And so I thought for sure, the other one would be, coming within the hour or whatever. And then the hour turns into a day and another day and another day. And so at this point, the doctors came in, they said, we're worried about infection, so we want to get the baby out. And I'm like, what? Like, basically, the baby would die. There's no tubes that small. And I said, no. And I'm there in my hotel room. Yeah, like it was a hotel. I'm there in my hospital room, and everyone had left for the night, and I'm just there, and I feel like I surrendered to God. I just said, if this baby's going to die anyway, let's just have it happen sooner, because I don't want to put the baby through trauma and myself through trauma. And I went to bed, and it was like a state of surrender. And then I woke up, and I was in full labor. I had no idea that I would be in full labor with, a 1 pound baby boy. And I had to go through that labor, and it was tough. And they had to actually pop the water that he was in, and then right after that he came right out. And I held him. He was moving all around. He was a bigger, maybe 1.5 pounds. He was bigger than Aaron. And it just, it was like unbelievable, unreal. And so I just held him till he passed, and did the same for Aaron. And depression is not even the word. When you go through something like that, you are in a state of trauma. You are in a state of like almost like post-traumatic stress. I'll never forget the month after, or like 2 months after, I just kept waking up in the middle of the night, call 911. And it was like very like post-traumatic stress is what it was. And so here I am 12 years later, and my husband was in that room. We weren't married then, but he was so supportive, and I knew at that moment, I'm like, this is the man I'm going to marry. So anyway, we did get married, a year later, and he had a daughter, 5.5. I started raising from a previous marriage. So I was I have been very grateful to have that experience. And I've always been like, what's going to happen, but I always had crazy infertility, never had a normal cycle and everything. And I've talked about that before on this channel. But switching to a plant-based, gluten-free diet, now I have perfect fertility at 40. I am ovulating and getting a period. If it's not every 28 days, it's like within, 35, 36 days. So it's incredible. This has never happened in my life, and I'm very hopeful. And at this point, I'm not going to pursue IVF, and I'm not going to pursue IUIs and all of it. I just, like my husband said, if it's going to happen, it's going to be by the grace of God, and it's going to happen naturally. And, but I have hope. I have never had the hope that I have now because, these dogs, oh my gosh. Because I have a cycle, I'm showing that I am normalized now because of this dietary change. So, yeah, I just wanted to give my story and the background and everything that I've been through. And so if I do have a miraculous pregnancy, I will report back on this channel. I mean, we are keeping track of fertility and things like that, but we're not going the extreme route. I did it already. I did it, and I'm not doing it again. Interestingly enough, I have thoughts of like, maybe if I do it now because I'm more fertile, but I have to calm those thoughts because I've been down that road. And yeah, now we're going for a miracle. So if anybody can relate to any of this, I wanted to make the video because you're not alone, and there's beautiful life that happens even after a lot of loss. I lost 3 babies in total, and I do feel like I have hope and love and compassion, and this vegan, gluten-free lifestyle has opened my eyes to compassion even further. And I really am sorry about the dogs. There's nothing I can do about that. But I thank you guys for listening to my story, and I'll catch you in the next video.